my name is Avan Loyola and I am currently a third year student in PUP.
Would you mind telling us why you are here in this program?
Well, I am here to learn about creative nonfiction, and I hope by the end of this program, I am able to understand what creative nonfiction truly is and distinguish the content of creative nonfiction as well. Also, I am hoping that I am able to differentiate creative nonfiction and nonfiction. Can you tell us what is creative nonfiction?
So, creative nonfiction merges the boundaries between literary arts, such as fiction and poetry, and research nonfiction, which includes statistical or fact field. So, it is a type of writing composed of the real or facts that employs the same literary devices as fiction, such as setting, voice, tone, character development, and more. And I think this makes it different, or this makes it more creative than standard nonfiction writing.
What should we consider when we are writing creative nonfiction? Well, when we say creative nonfiction, it is regarded by some readers as a more engaging form of nonfiction. Creative nonfiction tends to have an engaging, story-centric format that emphasizes narrative over a list of facts. This makes creative nonfiction different from other types of books associated with the nonfiction genre, like academic textbooks. That is why we need to learn some of the things that creative nonfiction should possess. First, creative nonfiction should include accurate and well-researched information. We are familiar with nonfiction contents wherein they present factual information which is different from the fiction contents that cannot be presented as facts. Second, creative nonfiction should hold the interest of the reader. We need to consider emphasizing on building a narrative. Readers respond to stories, not to lists of facts. Try to remember that. So for the third one, creative nonfiction should potentially blur the realms of fact and fiction in a pleasing literary style while remaining grounded in fact. As a work of nonfiction, your piece must be grounded in real life, and at the same time, it must be narrated interestingly to capture the attention of the readers. So, what then makes the creative nonfiction genre unique? Well, the first key element of nonfiction, probably the most crucial thing, is that the genre relies on the author's ability to retell events that actually happened. A talented creative nonfiction writer will certainly use imagination and craft to relay events that has actually happened and retell it, and the story must be true. You may have heard the idiom that truth is stranger than fiction. This is an essential part of genre. Events, coincidences, love stories, stories of loss that may be expected or feel cliché in fiction can be respected when they occur in real life. A writer of creative nonfiction should be on the lookout for material that can yield an essay. The world at large is their subject matter. Additionally, because creative nonfiction is focused on reality, it relies on research to render events as accurately as possible. While it's certainly true that fiction writers also research their subject, especially in the case of historical fiction, Creative nonfiction writers must be careful in their attention to detail. Their work is somewhat akin to that of a journalist, and in fact, some journalism can fall under the umbrella of the creative nonfiction as well. Writer Christopher Kokinos claims, "Done correctly, lived well, delivered elegantly, such research uncovers not only facts of the world, but reveals and shapes the world of the writer." In addition to traditional research methods, such as interviewing subjects or conducting database searches, he relays Kate Bernheimer's claim that a lifetime of reading is research. Any lived experience, even one that is read, can become material for the writer. The other key element present in all successful nonfiction is reflection. A person could have lived the most interesting life and had experiences that completely unique to them, but without context, without reflection on how this life of experiences affected the writer. The reader is left with the feeling that the writer hasn't learned anything, that the writer hasn't grown. We need to see that the writer has grown because a large part of the nonfiction's appeal is the lessons it offers us, the models for ways of living, that the writer can survive a difficult or strange experience and learn from it. In a moment of reflection, the author steps out of the story to show a different kind of scene, in which they are sitting at their computer or with their notebook in some quiet place, looking at where they are now versus where they were then, thinking critically about what they've learned. This should ideally happen in small moments, probably single sentences distributed throughout the piece. Without reflection, you have a collection of scenes open for interpretation, though they might add up to nothing.
Thank you for that wonderful question. So here we go. Based on the given meaning, the content of creative nonfiction doesn't necessarily have to come from the life and experience of the writer. But for me, the possible contents of creative nonfiction can be coming from the writer's life and experiences, as long as it is based on fact, truth, and can be proven as fact. Why not? So remember, autobiography is one of the examples of creative nonfiction, and it is about the author's life story of its own, and its content is based on the author's own information, so it can be. Thank you. Is it clear? So, yes, you may ask another question. Thank you for that wonderful question again. So, on the other hand, nonfiction often choose to write about topics or people close to them, as long as the piece deals with something real or something based on the real. The writer is allowed to take the piece in any direction. So this is a very interesting portion. So do you have any question so that I can answer it? Yes, I can. So as far as I know, when we say omniscient perspective, it is the most open and flexible point of view that all the writers are using in writing a particular story. So the author is narrating a particular story about characters with the use of these pronouns: she, he, and they. Okay. If I were going to write my very own creative nonfiction, its title would be "The Harder the Problem, the Better You Become." Because in my life, I face many problems and challenges. And there is no denying that they are already part of our lives. And without them, our lives may seem meaningless. So, face your problem because it will help you to hone yourself on how to be stronger and how to be stable, invulnerable, and resilient anymore.
What do writers do in writing creative nonfiction?
In creative nonfiction, writers attempt to observe, record, and thus shape a moments from real life situation. So this means that the writers will be going to observe and record their observations, research, and interviews accurately. And from that gathered data or information, they will now be going to create a good content of creative nonfiction. So in here, observation skills is important. Why? Because the writers will able to know if the informations are facts or not. Next, writer does extract meaning through factual details. They combine the fact of details with literary exploration necessary in rendering meaning from an observed scene. So after they got the meaning from the gathered factual information, they will now combine the necessary information only in transferring meaning from their observations. So the example of this one is the fact about yourself, or also called the autobiography. An autobiography, ourself is the writer. Next one is the fact of life of other people, and this is called the biography. The writer writes the life or history of the other people.
How does creative nonfiction become successful?
At the same time, successful creative nonfiction attempts to overlay with the traditional concepts of dramatic structure. To have a successful creative nonfiction, we should always remember the needed structures. The piece should suggest a beginning, middle, and end that conveys the conflicts and the characters and pushes the actions towards some sort of closure. Another example of nonfiction is personal essay. In personal essay, there should be a beginning, a middle, and end, and it also conveys the conflict and the character. And in personal essay, the character is ourselves.
Can you please give us more about the content of creative nonfiction?
Yeah, sure. So, creative nonfiction, it attempts to produce or project a dramatic literary framework upon everyday experience, rendering it enjoyable, enlightenment, and potentially meaningful.
How can you say that creative nonfiction attempts to project a dramatic literary framework upon everyday existence? How was that?
So it is said that creative nonfiction merges the difference or the boundaries between literary arts and research nonfiction. Meaning to say, it deals with a person's way of living, how he or she reacts to his or her surroundings, a person's behavior, and his or her way of life. It somehow reflects the way of life of a person, but it is written in a more creative way, for it uses and for it consists of plot, setting, tone, characters, and more.
What do you think is that one thing that differs creative nonfiction to fiction?
Okay, so fiction, it is all about the product of a writer's imagination. It uses characters that doesn't really exist in real life situation. Unlike fiction, Non-fiction uses characters which really exist in real-life situations. So examples for this are memoir, personal essays, journals, which writers uses and employ figurative language and literary devices to make it more meaningful and creative.
Should writers use sensory images in writing creative nonfiction?
Yeah, of course. Writers should dwell on sensory details. Describing something, how it feels, how it smells, how it tastes, not just how it looks, may help the passage come alive or come into life. And using the combination of sensory imagery and visual imagery may help students to form a vivid mental image for them to be able to understand clearly what is happening on the passage. And the goal here is to show, and not just to simply tell the story.
If the piece only summarizes the event, can we consider it a research nonfiction?
My answer is no. Because a piece should never just tell or summarize the story. It should have its beginning, middle, and ending, or its introduction, body, and conclusion that will clearly show how the conflict was solved by the character in this story. And I think that is what a research nonfiction does.
So before we end up our discussion, we would like to give you the famous quotation. Creative nonfiction writers do not make things up. They make ideas and information that already exists, more interesting and often more accessible. That is the famous quotation by Lee Gutkind. So it simply means that creative nonfiction writers do not make assumptions, do not make information that has no basis, whether it is true or not. Remember, if everything here is just invented, it's not about nonfiction, it's about fiction. Information and ideas must be factually accurate. Bear in mind once again that the ultimate goal of creative nonfiction writers is to communicate with readers, to tell information to readers just like a reporter. So I would also inform all of you about the relevance of this type of literature to us as future educators. We ourselves could integrate some examples of nonfiction in the class during our discussion to provide facts and inform our learners about real people and events. It also develops our prior knowledge and could offer children something that could help them long, whether or after the book is closed. Like for example, they could tell a story without looking at the book. When someone asks, they could and would respond. So that would be all. We hope that you have learned something. Thank you for the listening.